So we're doing something a bit different today for this deep dive. Not tracking a long trend, no historical arc. Instead, we're zeroing in, taking a really intensive look at just one single incredibly complex day, October 7th, 2025.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot in time.
Exactly. And the source material we've got here, it's a lot. It paints this picture of global chaos happening right alongside major progress.
Right.
We're seeing high-stakes geopolitical conflict centered around a really somber anniversary. Then there's this severe, deepening U.S. political crisis.
Yeah.
It was genuinely threatening the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people, plus major global trade shifts, and even, believe it or not, a foundational scientific breakthrough.
It really was a collision point.
Yeah.
High-stakes talks, political turmoil, and glimpses of the future all hitting at once.
So our job really is to filter that noise for you, the listener.
That's right. Because when so much is happening simultaneously, I mean, from Gaza to quantum mechanics, it's easy to lose the thread, the signal, and the noise. We need to cut through the individual headlines, connect the dots. What was the core driver? That sense of uncertainty, maybe. And how did that actually shape what people did in markets, diplomacy, Congress on this specific day?
Yeah, it's this collision of really profound moments. You've got
Yeah.
the solemn 2-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks.
Yeah.
At the same time, a U.S. government shutdown hitting its second week, and then this shockwave from a memo about federal back pay.
That memo was huge.
Oh, absolutely. And just dropped right in the middle of all that chaos. The Nobel Prize for macroscopic quantum mechanics gets announced. It's a lot.
Okay, yeah, let's try and unpack this timeline.
Right. We really have to start in the Middle East. October 7th, 2025 marked the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th, 2023 Hamas-led attacks on Israel. The sources we have depict a day of, well, very somber commemorations, but also intense public pressure. Pressure for the return of hostages still being held in Gaza.
And that weight, the weight of the anniversary, it's the crucial backdrop for all the diplomatic moves happening that day. You have to remember the scale of the conflict that started back in 2023. The initial attacks, according to Israeli figures, resulted in about 1,200 deaths and 251 people abducted.
Terrible number.
Just horrific. But then the subsequent Israeli campaign in Gaza, the cumulative death tolls cited by Gaza health authorities were exceeding 66,000, maybe even 67,000. That's the devastating human context for everything else we're talking about.
And yet, despite that staggering scale, diplomacy was, well, trying. Actively trying to move forward. Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas, with mediators involved, had actually resumed in Cairo on this day.
Trying to find a path.
And the immediate goal seemed pretty clear. Trying to get a deal that tied the release of the hostages. Estimates were around 48, still held to phased Israeli withdrawals from Gaza.
It's interesting, though, amidst all that human cost and the massive long-term security questions, you had President Trump signaling U.S. optimism. He actually said a deal was within reach.
Optimism feels like a strong word there.
Well, maybe politically necessary optimism, right, to keep the talks from collapsing entirely. But if you really dig into the source material, the sheer scale of the death toll just makes any kind of smooth resolution seem unlikely. What seemed to be really shaping the negotiations wasn't some newfound trust. It was public pressure.
From both sides.
Absolutely. War fatigue on one side, the sheer exhaustion and cost, and on the other, this relentless, understandable distress over the hostages still being held. That pressure cooker creates this very narrow window, this tight space for the negotiators to even try and operate in.
And that regional uncertainty, it doesn't stay contained, does it? It spills right over into the global risk picture almost immediately. We saw tensions flare up dramatically in maritime trade, for instance.
Yeah, that was a big one. Ukrainian President Zelensky made a really serious allegation. He accused Russia of using civilian oil tankers for spying, for reconnaissance, maybe even sabotage operations.
Wow, using oil tankers.
Exactly. Now, if that's true, if it could be substantiated, it fundamentally changes the whole risk calculation for global shipping. Think about it. A civilian ship, normal flags, secretly doing military ops. That skyrockets the legal stakes, insurance premiums go through the roof, and suddenly shipping companies are exposed to potential retaliation.
It's essentially weaponizing global commerce itself.
Pretty much, turning the tools of trade into potential weapons.
And while that maritime risk was bubbling up, we had the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, landing in India. He was there trying to lock down post-Brexit trade ties. It was framed as, a big mission to secure a win. But the sources highlight a really key political constraint he was under.
They do. Starmer made it very clear, explicitly stated, that Britain was not looking for a special visa deal for Indian workers. That's a deliberate political calculation. Keep migration separate from trade, completely siloed.
Why? Appeasing sentiment back home.
Seems like it. Prioritizing the political stability of his government, catering to maybe domestic anti-immigration feelings, even if it meant potentially leaving some economic gains on the table that might come with easier worker mobility. It's a classic example, really, of political uncertainty or constraints back home limiting what you can achieve in foreign policy.
Okay, so let's talk about the breakdown of stability back home here in the United States. The government shutdown had dragged into day 7. It was all driven by this gridlock over President Trump's demands immigration, specific spending cuts, stalling the appropriations bill. But this felt like more than just budget politics.
Oh, it definitely escalated beyond typical political infighting. This is where we got that policy shock, the one that really shook the foundations of the federal workforce. An Office of Management and Budget memo started circulating, and it basically said there was no automatic guarantee of back pay for the furloughed federal workers. We're talking about roughly 750,000 people.
Right. And that assertion, that's the critical insight from this day, I think. For years, especially after the 2019 shutdown, federal employees operated under this precedent, this expectation.
That they'd get paid eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That once the funding taps turned back on, Congress would authorize back pay. It was almost like an unwritten rule, a part of the contract. This OMB memo just ripped that up. It shifted from, we're temporarily closed, but we honor our commitment, to something much harsher.
Yeah.
Your paycheck is now just another bargaining chip in this political fight.
Precisely. And that memo instantly transformed the shutdown. It wasn't just a legislative squabble anymore. It became an immediate, direct financial threat to hundreds of thousands of families. It signals this fundamental breakdown of institutional trust. And the impacts weren't theoretical. They were immediate and very visible. Not just morale, but essential services started grinding to a halt.
Yeah, the most obvious consequence for the public was probably transportation. We saw reports of massive flight delays across the country. Why? Severe staffing shortages. Air traffic controllers, security personnel, they weren't getting paid, and the guarantee they would get paid was suddenly gone.
Right. You saw places like Burbank Airport in California, flights grounded for hours. You simply can't ask people doing critical safety jobs landing planes to work indefinitely with no guarantee of a paycheck.
It's untenable.
Completely. And the economic fallout immediately reflected that instability. Stocks took a dive at S&P 500, Dow Jones snapping winning streaks. Part of it was just raw fear, sure. But another key factor, the shutdown meant the government stopped releasing vital economic data.
Ah, right. No official stats.
None. Investors were essentially flying blind. How do you assess the health of the economy without official unemployment numbers, housing data, inflation figures? You can't.
Which raises a really vital question for you, the listener. When the perceived bedrock stability of the U.S. federal government itself seems to be crumbling, where does global money go? Where's the safety?
And here's where it gets really fascinating, and it proves your point about that systemic shock. The money flooded into perceived safe havens, hard assets. Gold prices surged. They hit new highs, near $3,977 an ounce spot. And U.S. gold futures crossed $4,000 for the very first time ever.
$4,000 an ounce. Wow.
Yeah. And this wasn't like an inflation story primarily. This was a direct fear-driven flight to safety triggered by the U.S. shutdown uncertainty, and specifically by that memo, the perceived risk that the U.S. government might not even pay its own workforce reliably. That unexpected political instability, that breakdown of trust, it literally became an asset class driver. It moved markets significantly.
And meanwhile, the political tension wasn't just physical, it was escalating into these really fundamental constitutional challenges. President Trump ramped up threats to invoke the Insurrection Act. He was clashing with Democratic-led cities, specifically calling out Chicago and Portland.
And it wasn't just threats on this day, was it?
No. Federal troops actually began arriving in Chicago on October 7th, which, unsurprisingly, prompted Illinois officials to immediately file a lawsuit. They called the deployment illegal, dangerous, and unconstitutional.
I mean, that's a direct confrontation over the separation of powers, over federalism itself. You have the executive branch asserting authority to deploy federal military forces within states, directly challenging state and local governments. And while that's happening, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on another deeply divisive issue.
Right. The case in challenging state, bans on conversion therapy for minors. The focus was on Colorado's ban specifically. What was the core legal issue the justices were wrestling with?
It wasn't really about whether the therapy itself was good or bad, medically speaking. The heart of the legal argument, as presented in the sources, was about viewpoint discrimination. Several justices seemed skeptical of the state's position. They questioned whether the law was essentially picking sides, whether it was impermissibly favoring one viewpoint in talk therapy, presumably one aligned with affirming gender identity, while completely banning another viewpoint.
So regulating the content of therapy.
Exactly. The question became, can the state government regulate the actual content of speech, the specific words and opinions exchanged, during a private therapeutic interaction between a licensed professional and a minor patient? They seem to be asking if the state was censoring only one type of verbal guidance while allowing therapists to promote other state-favored viewpoints. It's a really complex First Amendment question playing out in a therapeutic context.
Okay, so we've got geopolitical stress, deep domestic breakdown of trust. Let's pivot slightly to global trade friction, because the U.S. wasn't alone in leaning towards, well, protectionism.
No, that trend seemed pretty widespread. De-risking protectionism, whatever you want to call it, it was definitely in the air. Take North America. President Trump hosted the Canadian PM, Mark Carney. Trump made reassuring noises, promised to treat Canada fairly, but he stayed noticeably non-committal about the future of the whole USMCA trade framework. And this was happening while ongoing U.S. tariff actions were still hitting Canadian industries' actions, Canada explicitly called painful. So the message to allies, even close ones like Canada, seemed to be trade deals are conditional, constantly up for review, maybe even disposable.
And Europe was echoing that kind of stance on the very same day, weren't they, with steel imports?
Yeah, the European Commission proposed some pretty significant curbs on steel imports. They talked about having the tariff-free quotas and then slapping a hefty 50% duty on anything beyond that limit.
Ouch. Who are they targeting?
Well, the justification was tackling global surplus capacity, which is often code for targeting production, especially from China. The stated goal was to boost utilization rates for European steel plants, get them closer to 80% capacity. It just shows this broader trend, the global trading system kind of retreating into national or regional shells, prioritizing domestic industrial stability over those seamless global markets we used to talk about.
It's fascinating, though, because while the world seemed to be grappling with all this political and economic, maybe regression, fundamental physics took this huge leap forward. The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded jointly to John Clark, Michel Devoret, and John Martinis.
Right. And their prize was for something that sounds incredibly technical, but it's truly foundational. It was for the discovery of macroscopic quantum mechanical tunneling and energy quantization in an electric circuit.
Okay, break that down. Macroscopic quantum effects.
Yeah, I mean, quantum mechanics usually describes the weird, fuzzy, probabilistic world of atoms and subatomic particles, things behaving in ways that defy our everyday intuition. What Clark, Devoret, and Martinis did was engineer systems, basically. Sophisticated electrical circuits you could, physically hold, where these distinct quantum effects, like tunneling and energy levels being quantized, meaning they can only take specific discrete values, could actually be observed and controlled on a much larger macroscopic scale.
So it's not just about building quantum computers, which is kind of the headline application everyone talks about.
That's a major outcome, yes. But the fundamental achievement is deeper. It's about pushing the boundaries of physics, proving that we can engineer and witness quantum behavior, quantum coherence in manufactured systems, not just in nature's tiniest building blocks. They essentially forced the classical world, our everyday world, to reckon with quantum reality on an engineered, human-built scale. It's profound.
Wow. But as we celebrate that kind of deep scientific progress, the immediate ethical headaches from existing tech seem to be accelerating just as fast. The sources reported some significant cybersecurity actions on this day, too.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin, isn't it? OpenAI, for example, announced they'd banned a bunch of accounts. These were linked to suspected Chinese government groups who were apparently trying to get AI tools for surveillance purposes or experimenting with malicious automation. And they also took down accounts linked to Russian criminal outfits.
So the tools of the future are being weaponized almost as soon as they're built.
It seems that way. And speaking of weaponization, or maybe emotional exploitation, there were also reports gaining traction about this growing phenomenon of people forming relationships, even quasi-romantic ones, with AI chatbot.
Right, I saw that. AI companions.
Exactly. And it's raising these really serious psychological questions, concerns about dependency, about blurring the lines between sophisticated simulation and actual human connection. Is the real danger the AI itself, or is it that we, as humans, are becoming vulnerable to mistaking convincingly simulated empathy for the real thing?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? Our technical ability to create these complex systems seem to be racing ahead of our collective wisdom about how to handle their psychological and social impacts. We also had a few quick but high-impact updates hitting the news wires that day. A big media shakeup was happening.
Yeah, Paramount Skydance acquired the Free Press, the right-wing media outlet. Big price tag, too, $150 million. And as part of that whole sphere, Bari Weiss was named editor-in-chief of CBS News. That signals a potentially significant shift or consolidation within major media landscapes.
Definitely one to watch. And then there was a health warning that probably caught a lot of people off guard.
The one about liver disease. Yeah, that was striking. New studies were linking both sugary soft drinks and diet sodas to a surge in liver disease. But the really startling finding was for the zero-sugar drinks. People drinking those regularly were found to be up to 60% more likely to develop liver disease compared to people who didn't drink them at all.
60%. That really challenges the healthy alternative assumption many people have.
It certainly does. Makes you rethink those labels.
And finally, just to underscore the real-world stakes of all the political chaos, we have to mention the weather. All this was happening under the shadow of severe weather threats. Tropical Storm Jerry had formed in the Atlantic, and out in the Pacific, Hurricane Priscilla was bearing down on Baja California Sur, nearing major hurricane strength.
And the sources specifically noted that the U.S. government shutdown was actively complicating preparations and the federal response efforts for these storms. It's just a stark reminder, isn't it? Governmental failure isn't abstract. It directly impacts physical safety and disaster response.
Absolutely. So, wrapping this all up, what does this incredibly packed day, October 7th, 2025, mean for you, the listener? We've touched on the solemn anniversary of the October 7th attacks and the immense human cost still unfolding. We saw the economic shockwave sending gold to an unprecedented $4,000 an ounce. We saw federal troops arriving in Chicago amid constitutional clashes, and simultaneously this giant leap forward in understanding macroscopic quantum science. It was truly a day where high-stakes politics just slammed into deep technological and scientific shifts.
Yeah, and if we try to pull out the dominant theme, the main driver across all these different events on October 7th, 2025, I think it really comes down to the profound systemic impact of unexpected uncertainty. You had geopolitical talks kind of bogged down by long-standing historical uncertainty, sure. But domestically, that shock over the potential denial of federal back pay, that was the big, unexpected destabilizer.
It broke something fundamental.
It really did. It felt like a breach of the social contract between the government and its employees. And you saw the result directly driving market behavior, that gold surge wasn't random. It proved that political instability, especially unexpected instability in the U.S., is now a primary force dictating global asset values. Uncertainty itself became the asset class.
And at the very same time, you have the march of fundamental physics, bringing quantum weirdness to a practical, macroscopic scale happening alongside this intense debate over whether we can or should form intimate relationships with AI. It shows that even as our grasp of the physical universe deepens, our ethical guidelines, our emotional boundaries, they're all being redrawn at incredible speed. We seem to be building the future much faster than we can agree on the rules for living in it. So here's a final thought for you to mull over. Looking at that day, which challenge do you think will ultimately prove more defining for the years ahead? Is it the chaos born from the failures of political governance, the shutdowns, the constitutional crises? Or is it the deep ethical ambiguity created by the explosion of artificial intelligence and all the new technological power we're unleashing? Which storm will shape us more? Something to think about until our next deep dive.